Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project, conscious conversations, empowered parenting with me, Susan Dolci. It's time to open our hearts and our minds to what it means to be a parent, exploring and expanding the ways we communicate, validate, and show up daily for our kids. With a parent-centric focus, you learn to become more present, a better active listener, more reflective, more engaged, and mutually empowered. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. The Awakened Parent Project starts now. Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm your host, I'm Susan Dolci. I'm a certified parent coach with the Jai Institute for Parenting, and it's my hope that you will find this a safe space to journey on a path of both spiritual and practical self-exploration. From the time my first daughter was born in 1994, so yes, I've been doing this a long time, I've been driven by a vision where children are nurtured both physically and spiritually by adults who are present, grounded, and empowered. I believe that conscious communication, self-exploration, and self-forgiveness are the tools that enable parents to foster deep, lasting connections with their children. Parenting is about I'm so tongue-tied. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna take a sip of water. Let's just be real. Parenting isn't about perfection, nor is podcasting. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. And today I'm joined by somebody who I hope forgives all my foibles. My guest is Allana Robinson. She's founder of Uncommon Sense Parenting and the creator of Parentability and the host of the Mudroom podcast. Allana supports parents of toddlers, preschoolers, and kindergartners in understanding why their children are misbehaving and how to fix it. And this is really important, guys, without yelling, shaming, or timeouts. For a decade, she was a registered early childhood educator and a developmental specialist for children with special needs, creating targeted behavior and intervention plans. Allana has spent countless hours reading the latest child development and behavioral psychology research. She's also certified in pivotal response therapy and the Shanker Self-Reg, and is trained in relationship development intervention, Hanen social communication, and collaborative and proactive solutions. Her mission is to empower parents as the expert on their own child and create an inclusive world full of calm, competent, confident kids. So you had to give me alliteration that was gonna I had to pre-record a show this morning, so I think that's it. I'm all just a jumble of words this morning. So anyway, it is wonderful to have you here, Allana. I'm so excited. I have been watching your Instagram lives, and I want to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the show. You did one that I just loved about when kids say scary stuff. So definitely want to hit on that because that, I thought that was brilliant. Anyway, yep. I know every podcaster, every interview, they get asked this question, but I think it's always interesting to hear about your journey and what brought you to this work and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, so when I was in university and I wasn't studying child development at first, I was going to be a graphic designer. And I grew up in a very, very small town and I was going to university in Toronto. So I went to this huge city and I was feeling so out of touch with myself and lost. And my mom was like, go find a family to babysit for. That'll give you just some normalcy in your life. So I did, and I ended up babysitting for a family that has 2 little boys on the autism spectrum and their neurotypical big sister. And within 6 months of working for them, I was just obsessed. They did a form of therapy called relationship development intervention. And they were Americans in Canada, so they weren't covered under our provincial healthcare system. So they weren't accessing typical services for children with autism. So mom and I were the ones doing therapy at home for the most part. And I was just absolutely obsessed. RDI really kind of brings forward why things that children typically just learn kind of by osmosis, how those actually happen. And I couldn't get enough of it. So I switched my major to child development. And within a couple of years, I was working as an early interventionist for children with every stripe of special needs, from your typical run-of-the-mill speech delay, all the way up to one of my clients is one of 3 children in North America with their specific diagnosis. So I've gone from totally typical to totally broke the mold.
Yeah.
And I loved it so much. I was in people's homes with their families, with their children, in daycares, kindergartens, preschools, anywhere a child would typically be, doing early intervention therapy with their kids. And then a series of events happened very quickly. I got injured, and so my agency was no longer willing to put me frontline anymore, because during my injury, I found out I was pregnant. And so they were a little leery of putting me. I like to work specifically with the kids who were very high needs, who had kind of violent, very aggressive tendencies. And they were like, this is not where a pregnant woman should be.
Yeah.
So I got moved into a parent coaching role. And at the time I thought it was the end of my life. Like, I was like, there goes my career. And I ended up falling absolutely in love with it. And I loved seeing how, when parents really understood why their children were doing what they were doing, how that absolutely opened up their world. It made parenting so much easier for them. The children were happier, the family was happier, the children in their community were happier. It just had such an impact. And my husband's in the Canadian Forces, so shortly after my oldest was born, we actually had to move across the country. And so I just kept going with it. And now I've been doing it for almost 8 years.
It's fabulous. And here's the thing. I think, tell me if you can relate to this, that, you don't really, parents don't usually come to you until they're in crisis.
Yeah.
And I see the work that you do, like you have your posse on Facebook and all of that. And the whole idea is to have a community so that they know they're not alone, going through these, the challenges that we all go through, but we often feel so isolated. And, oh my God, why is my kid doing this? I'm so embarrassed. Or what am I doing wrong? I must be a horrible parent. And so, it's great to, I guess, sort of catch them early, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. When I was in kindergartens, preschools, daycares with all of these kids who have special needs, I was constantly being pulled away from my client, because there was always one or two kids in every class that were the difficult kids. And so they weren't getting services because they didn't have a diagnosis. There was nothing wrong with them. And so this kid who had special needs, their services were getting co-opted by these other kids who nobody was giving any attention to. Their parents weren't getting any support. And it was negatively impacting not only them and their peers, but the child who actually needed the services.
Right. Yeah.
So when I started parent coaching privately, I was like, these are the parents that I want to get, and I want to get them early, because if their child is in crisis for things that are very, on the grand scheme of things, simple to address, then they're not going to be in a position where they're in a classroom with a child who actually needs in-classroom services and having their services taken away because their child is more behavioral than the child who has special needs. So my whole company is built around this: get them early, teach them how it's working, and then keep supporting them in an ongoing way, because that's where, you read the parenting books, you watch the videos on YouTube, and you're like, okay, I got it, I understand. And then you go to put it into practice with your kid, and nothing works the way that the person on the TV said it would.
Yep.
So there's that ongoing support that really needs to be happening for parents, because your kids aren't predictable. Like, I'm good, but I'm not omniscient.
Well, yeah, the other thing too, is that I think when you're considering, having children, for the most part, either you're going to want to be a completely different parent than the way you were parented, or you think, I can do this. Like, I turned out okay. I think I can be a great parent, until you're actually in the trenches. And then you're like, because earlier today, I said I was doing a pre-record, and I was talking to a woman who is an expert in Enneagrams. And so it was all about personalities. And like, you just because you might have these hopes and dreams of what your child's going to look like or act like or be like, they're born with their personality. And it's probably not going to be the same as yours. And how do you deal with those personality clashes and your partner's personality? It's fascinating. So given that early intervention stuff, I know you are huge on brain science. And as am I think it's so important. I think like brain science, attachment science, nervous system science, these are all the things that are so important to understand when your kids are young.
Yeah.
So tell me about brain system science.
Yeah, so my whole thing is I want you to understand what's going on under the hood, because we take our children's behavior so personally as parents, and our children misbehave, or they're having a tantrum, or they do something that we weren't expecting them to do. And immediately we're like, oh, how did they learn this from me? Like, where did they pick this up? And we take it so personally. Whereas when you understand how the brain actually functions, it makes it a lot less personal. It gives you that 6 degrees of separation so that you can stay calm, so that you can teach your child. So I teach the triune brain, which is basically the brain's broken up into 3 major areas. Your neocortex, so that top layer of your brain that's responsible for learning, language, your executive functioning skills, and your reason. And then your limbic system, which is that like core nucleus that's kind of even with your ears, and it's responsible for your emotions, your safety, and your memories. And then your brainstem, which is responsible for fight or flight, keeping you safe, your animal instincts. So we talk about a lot about what those 3 parts of the brain do, what they're responsible for, that kind of hierarchy of needs, literally, from your base animal instincts all the way up to your cerebral ability to metacognate, and what conditions are going to change those, and what it looks like when your child is using each part of their brain. Because if you can look at your kid and go, your limbic system is running the show right now, and you know what that means, then you're not going to punish them for something that's completely out of their control when they physically don't have access to the part of their brain that you're hoping that they would use. You're just going to try and solve the problem. So I talk a lot about how when your children are not feeling safe, and a lot of parents get very defensive about that because they're like, my child is safe, right? They're in a safe environment, I swear. Yeah. It's not that they aren't safe. It's when they don't feel safe, when they don't perceive to be safe in any way that could manifest itself. When your child doesn't feel safe, or they're low enough on energy that their brain is going, if danger comes, I'm safe right now, but if danger comes, I won't have the energy to protect myself. It literally disconnects that top layer of our brain, because all that thinking and learning and reasoning and language and all that fun stuff is cool, but it's not keeping us alive.
Right.
It's not necessary. So our brain is going to prioritize the part of its functions that are necessary, that are keeping us alive. And that's our security, our ability to fight, flight, freeze, fib, fawn. And it's going to prioritize our emotions, because when we're not feeling safe, we need to be sensing things, right? We don't need to be thinking about them.
Right. We need to. And that's what we do. We walk into a room and you scan and you like for safety. Yeah.
Exactly. And our limbic system actually gives off brain waves. Just like there's light waves and sound waves, there's that limbic resonance is what it's called. And resonance is a music term that typically applies to sound waves. But our limbic system gives off brain waves. And that's why when you walk into a room, you can automatically sense, okay, that person is not okay.
Yeah,
that person is on top of me.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and we want our children to be able to have that, to do that, intuit that.
Exactly. And like, if you go back to like caveman times, it was a survival thing, right? If dad sees a lion walking across our path, we need a way to recognize that dad senses danger without dad having to turn around and go, danger, because that'll draw attention to us. So, but now we're in this world where there's danger signals coming from everywhere. And especially in the last 2 years, where there was this ever-present intangible danger that everyone was on high alert for, but there was nothing that they could like pick up and be like, this is the danger. There was nothing we could put a pin in. So a lot of our kids have spent the last 2 years getting danger signals for things that weren't actually dangerous. And that's why right now we're seeing all of this stress behavior, because they don't know what is safe and what isn't. And when we don't feel safe, we can't think, we can't use our language, we can't use our knowledge, we can't use our executive functioning skills.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about how that actually impacts how you parent, like understanding that, and then, and talk about how to help your child regulate. But just to know that, to understand that this is not developmentally, I'm asking my child to do something that they're not developmentally ready for, which is a big thing for me. Okay, we're going to take a break. You're listening to the Awaken Parent Project, and we'll be back in a little bit. I'm Susan Dolci. Today, I'm joined by Allana. Allana. It's just really, I'm just going to mess me up over and over again. Robinson, I can get that right. She is a child development specialist, and she is a parent coach. Well, I'll let you tell everybody, what's the name of your website and how can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at AllanaRobinson.com. Allana spelled with 2 L's, 1 N. And you can find me on Instagram at Parenting Posse. And then on Facebook, we have Uncommon Sense Parenting Facebook page, and then the Parenting Posse Facebook group, which has over 10,000 parents in it right now, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. And you have a free giveaway, and it's linked to this show on Transformation Talk Radio. So if you go to the Awaken Parent Project's link on TTR and you click on the show description, it's a giveaway. She has a class, How to Raise Well-Behaved Kids Without Yelling, Shaming, or Timeouts. People, it's possible.
Yes, absolutely.
It's possible. And she's going to teach you how to do it.
Yes.
Because I know it's like so many people are like, what do you mean yelling, shaming, or timeouts? Or, or also like rewards or punishments. Like, it's called collaboration, people. It's like, but it's new. It's I feel like we're in this sort of trend of gentle parenting, of I can't think of all of the terms. There's so many right now. But I mean, it really is. I feel I'm going to get a little spiritual here. I feel like we are ushering in a generation of children that are much more sensitive, much more self-aware, much more conscious, but we just need to give them the tools. We're not the ones. That's why we have to do the work on ourselves. Yeah. So we can support our children to be these amazing humans that they're going to be, to help save our world and our government and all those things. Yeah. So before the break, we were talking about brain science, understanding brain development. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about like understanding why it's so important that we need to understand what is developmentally appropriate for our kids and how that impacts how we parent.
Well, so the brain doesn't come out ready to rock, right? Like, especially when we're talking about self-regulation, that top level of our brain with all of that civilized human being stuff that we were talking about, it doesn't actually start getting wired up until birth. It's there, it exists, but it's not until we come out into the world and we get this nice little rush of hormones that it starts to develop, and it doesn't finish developing until we're about 25 years old. So a lot of parents don't even have a fully developed brain when they're having their own kids. I sure didn't.
And I have 3 kids in their 20s, so I can attest to that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about developmental appropriateness, we need to know where along that spectrum of development our child's brain is, because oftentimes parents are putting demands on their children that just they cannot meet. They physically cannot meet that. And then it frustrates us. It frustrates our child. It makes us feel like we're failing when in reality, that's just what a 3-year-old does. Mm-hmm. So things like people talk about like the terrible twos and how, they're very demanding and they cry and they melt down over all kinds of things. Well, when you look at what a 2-year-old's developing, they're developing, first of all, they're going through a massive understanding of separation and that I am a separate person from my mother. And therefore, when she's not with me, she's off doing other things. And
I'm not safe necessarily. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not, right. So it comes back to that self-regulation. I might not be safe. I don't have the person who has given me all of my safety signals for the last 2 years present with me. That means I have to start detecting if I'm safe or not on my own. Shoot. They're going through a massive language development, but it's mostly in receptive language, not necessarily in expressive language. They do have some expressive language development happening, obviously.
Like, no.
they're about, at 2 years old, they're about a year behind their expressive development how am I saying this? Their receptive development is about a year ahead of their expressive development. So they're able to think much bigger thoughts and to understand much bigger concepts than they can actually make come out of their mouths. And that's intensely frustrating for them. because they can think about something, they can see something they want, they can feel something that they want to communicate, but the motor planning just isn't there. They can't communicate it in a way that adults are going to understand. And so there's that. They're going through their executive functioning skills, start developing it too. So they go from this mostly like limbic creature who uses their emotions to express themselves to having thoughts, to being able to metacognate, to being able to learn really efficiently, to be able to, they're starting to get that kind of like planning and prioritizing and organization and self-monitoring and flexible thinking and all those skills that we use to do life. Those are just starting to develop, but they're developing, they're not there. So oftentimes when we're having like 2-year-olds throwing themselves on the floor, it's because we're asking them to use their executive functioning skills at a much higher level than they physically have the ability to do.
And how much of that also, so something else I really wanted to touch on is understanding that like what's the root of the meltdown. So there, it's like, I always like to say, like, whatever's causing the meltdown, it's not the thing that's happening in the moment. That's the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
So,
especially when it comes to meltdowns, not tantrums.
Yeah. And so it's like, so understanding those cues from your kid.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because as you said, meltdowns are usually about sensory input or a lack of sensory input. It's the nervous system being way hyper aroused and unable to calm itself down. And they perceive generally when they're crying for something, when they're melting down, there's like something that they want, whether that's your attention or an object or food or whatever it is. That is what they perceive to be the key to calming their nervous system down. Doesn't mean it is. It's just that whatever in that moment in their little brain, they're like, if I could just get some chocolate.
I'm sure the mom's thinking the same thing, or the dad. If I could just get some chocolate.
Right? If I could just get some chocolate, this all would go away. And they're not entirely wrong, right? Like our brains, part of the thing that our brain monitors to know if we're safe or not is our glucose levels. And if our glucose is too low, our brain is going to go, we do not have the physical energy in the tank to protect ourselves if a lion comes over that hill. So we're going to stop using that neocortex because it's taken up too much energy and it's not actually protecting us right now. And so that's when things get really escalated because we're trying to reason with a child who doesn't feel safe. Again, doesn't mean they're not safe, just means that they don't feel safe. They don't perceive to be safe. Whereas like with tantrum, a tantrum is that more typical what parents think all meltdowns are, where there's a thing that they want, and the second you give it to them, they're like, thank you. And they keep going, right? They're conscious and purposeful. And those are two completely different things. So knowing what is causing it and always erring, especially with little ones, like tantrums don't really come into play until they're like 6+. Before that,
and I think that's what you're saying is key. I think a lot of parents, because I feel like there's a lot of parents that believe early on that their children they already have this idea that their children are going to be manipulative.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say it, I say it all the time, kids want to behave.
Yeah.
Kids don't. And so when they have these outbursts or whatever, it's an unmet need. Yeah. And trying to whittle away to what is the unmet need, especially if their vocabulary is low.
Exactly. And that unmet need 9 times out of 10 is because they don't feel safe. They're not regulated. They don't perceive that they have the ability to keep themselves safe from whatever the threat that they're determining or they're perceiving is present, right? They want to feel safe. That is our prime directive as humans, is to feel safe and loved and secure. And if we don't, then we're going to become hyper aroused. Our nervous system is naturally going to elevate. And we're not meant to be in that elevated state. That's why everyone was so exhausted during the pandemic, because we're not made to be in that hyper aroused, high alert state for that length of time.
Yeah.
And when you think about the fact that like a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, they're going in and out of that state regularly because they don't have control of their world. They don't get to take breaks when they need them, especially when we're talking about 4-year-olds. And again, developmental appropriateness. 4-year-olds, their amygdala is tripling in volume. So it's super awake. It is super sensitive. And their amygdala is completely responsible for keeping them safe, for detecting danger. It's like if you install a security system and you have to calibrate the cameras so that it doesn't go off every time like a leaf falls on the lawn. They're moving from their infant settings, which, you know, reference mom and dad, to their childhood settings, which is I have to detect danger on my own. But in between those two periods of time, their amygdala is like, everything is an attack. Anything new or unexpected is a potential danger that may actually off me.
We're going to take. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to take another break. We could go the whole hour without break. But when we come back, I'd like to talk about some techniques to teach our children and ourselves as parents to help self-regulate and co-regulate. We're going to take a break and we'll be back in a little bit. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is the Awakened Parent Project. I am with Allana. I said it right. Allana Robinson. I'm just so embarrassed. Anyway, we were talking about self-regulating. We're going to talk more about that. But I want to talk again. You've got a free giveaway for us. It's on the link to the show on transformationtalkradio.com. And it is how to raise well-behaved kids without yelling, shaming, or timeouts. So what can they expect in this class, in this free class?
Absolutely. So during that class, I go through the 3 major parenting mistakes that pretty much every parent I've ever met is making that are actually causing misbehavior. It's making your life harder and you need to stop. And so we talk about those first. And then we talk about how switching your focus from behavior management to skill development is that secret ingredient for well-behaved kids. And then we go through my 3-factor framework for doing that. How can we actually teach our kids the skills that they need to behave well and to grow up to be confident, competent, well-behaved kids? And so we cover all of that. It's about an hour long, and it's my pride and joy.
And it's free.
It's free.
It's free. So much great stuff in an hour-long free class. And your website is uncommonsenseparenting.com.
AllanaRobinson.com. Yeah, we haven't quite switched over to uncommonsenseparenting.com.
Because
if you go to uncommonsenseparenting.com, it will redirect you. So.
Yeah, because that's what I was doing, and it was like, how is that not it? Because that's what that's how I got to you.
We haven't quite made the switch from one to the other yet.
As long as if they put that in, it gets them there. That's really right.
They'll end up in the right spot.
So we were talking about. Okay, a child is, struggling. We are struggling. We're in a tough situation with our child. And how do we help them? How do we teach them to self-regulate? And more importantly, I think, is how do we regulate ourselves to co-regulate with our child? Because we are like, I don't like to use the vampire term, but really they are using our energy level. They are picking up our frequency. And if we're like this, they're going to be like this because mom's not safe. Mom's freaking out. Dad's freaking out. I have to too. So it is so important that we learn how to do that.
Absolutely. So the biggest thing about regulation is that it's an ongoing thing. It's something that we have to do consistently throughout the day. And that can be a hard routine to get into. I usually recommend to parents that they start with putting in regulation breaks near their meals, because that tends to be a natural break in their day anyway. So it's easy to marry those two, habit stacking. So really the first thing to do is to look at what regulates your child, observe them, watch them, because children, even children who are canalized into dysregulation, they're going to have those periods of flow when they're calm, they're alert and engaged. And so you want to look at what they're doing, what they did before, what they're doing during, and what they're doing after they're in that state, and try and offer more of it. So like personally, I realized very early on that my youngest is a runner. he has his most calm periods of behavior after he's been running around like the Tasmanian devil. So I was like, all right, this kid's a runner. We're going to build in runs throughout his day so that he gets into a habit of taking himself for those breaks throughout the day. And that regulation gives them more energy. When he was in kindergarten, he was refusing to do his math homework and his schoolwork, I guess. It wasn't at home. And the teacher came to me and she was like, so there's this really weird thing happening where mid-afternoon, they'll get involved in a math activity and he just refuses to do it. And I was like, well, that's odd because he's actually quite good at math. I'm dyscalculic, but he's good to go. Like he's way beyond me in math, that's for sure, even at 5. And she was like, well, he won't do it. And I was like, does he say anything? And she was like, they asked us to go for a run. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense.
What he needs.
Yeah, like that makes sense. I'm like, so let him go for a run. And she's like, I can't just let a 5-year-old go for a run. And I was like, sure you can. What do I need to sign? So I signed the waiver, and you could tell she thought I was like just out of my mind. And signed the waiver. Next day, she calls me after school and she was like, holy crap. She's like, he asked to go for a run. I told him you can go do 5 laps of the school and then you need to come back. And he did. He went for his 5 laps. He came back. He knocked out the math activity, got everything right, and was like, okay, what's next? And I was like, because running is very regulating for him. And I've been working with him since he was 2 to recognize when he's dysregulated and not to push himself, but to take a break. Yeah. And so if you weren't going to give him the break, he was going to take it, whether you were going to sanction it or not.
And the thing that's fascinating about that is I think a lot of people think that like it'd have to be like breathing exercises. And I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, these are all great things, but more activity seems like that would be the opposite of what you are trying to accomplish.
Parents conflate calm and quiet.
Yes.
Right? They think that calm, and this is, parents will say to me, well, they're only calm when they're watching TV. No, TV is a very hyper arousing activity. I challenge any parent to watch any child's show and count to 30 before the camera angle changes. You can't do it.
Oh, I've never thought about that before.
You can't do it. If you watch like a show from the 80s, like go watch an old Sesame Street or old Thomas the Tank Engine. My son was obsessed with them because that's all I would let him watch. If you do that, you'll be able to do it. But any modern child's show, you cannot count to 30 before the camera angle changes. It's super stimulating.
Well, and that's what I've also been told. I mean, I've given this advice before, and I know it works, is like, if you are allowing your child screen time or like video games, that's the best way to have them transition off of that, is to have them run around or like get outside and get really physical.
They need sensory input. They need that proprioceptive input. They need that vestibular input. A lot of times they need a lot of auditory input, a lot of visual input, because their brain is super stimulated. And then they go from all of that stimulation to nothing. Mm-hmm. So of course, they're not going to want to make that transition. And of course, they're not going to be calm afterwards, right? Parents are always like, well, they melt down when I turn it off. Of course they do. You just took their dopamine away. You just took their drug of choice and turned it off. Of course they did. So again, by providing that in different ways throughout the day on a set schedule, and I think this is where like kids are forced into these schedules, these adult-led, adult-convenient schedules that don't take into account the fact that their energy levels are not going to peak and valley with the adult schedule. And so oftentimes kids know that they're hitting the wall, right? They refuse, and parents will say, well, they're so defiant. No, they're dysregulated. They're like, I cannot meet your expectation in this moment, so I'm not even going to try because I know I'm going to fail. And that's not defiance. That's actually really great self-awareness, and we want to build off of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really kind of active self-preservation.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is. It 100% is, because children, if they know that they can't meet your expectation, they know that that's dangerous. And often that's when parents will say, well, when I yell, they can do it. Yes, you just gave them cortisol. That's emergency energy.
Right.
But when children are using cortisol is an emergency situation, right? And it's corrosive. It's not good for our brain. So when we yell, we flood our children with cortisol. but they're still using their limbic system. They're not using their neocortex. So they go do it on autopilot because they have the muscle memory, but they don't actually learn from that action. It just is like something that you do without thinking because you're trying to keep yourself safe.
What about mommy or daddy self-regulation?
Yeah. Well, just like our children need regulation cycles, we need regulation cycles. And where a lot of parents get tripped up is that their regulation cycle doesn't match up with their child's regulation cycle. So they're like, well, my child needs a regulation break every 2 to 3 hours, but I really just need 1, 2 a day. And I'm like, cool, that's fine. They don't have to be at the same time. It's great if you can schedule them that way, but if they don't, they don't. And like me personally, I'll use myself as an example. I'm a hitter. My preference of sensory input is that nice proprioceptive input of hitting something. Fortunately, that would generally result in a felony. So I have
Unless you have a heavy
bag.
bag like I do in my basement, but I'm not the hitter. It's my husband. He likes to.
Yeah, I have a punching bag. I tore it off its moorings twice during the pandemic because I was that stressed. But I will often say to my children when I'm starting to feel hyper aroused, you know what? I need a break. I'm going to go kick the crap out of my punching bag and I'll be back and we'll deal with whatever is going on here. And they don't follow me. They have their own punching bag in a separate space. So if they also feel that need, they can go do it without being in my grill. But I model that for them. I don't feel like I can deal with this right now. And because I'm going to get angry if I keep trying to, I'm going to go and take a break. And that break just has to be 10 to 20 minutes. People think of like, oh, well, we're letting them get out of it. Well, no, it's a break. It's not. You're going to go back to the situation and deal with it, but you're just hitting the pause button to go and deal with your own needs, get the sensory input that you need. And a lot of parents, they have difficulty connecting with what that sensory need is because when we were kids, it was denied to us over and over and over and over again. So we've become disconnected from our bodies. And like, I realized I was always getting in trouble for hitting in high school. And I was like, why, like, I know that I'm not supposed to hit people. Why is that my first instinct when somebody pisses me off? Because that's the sensory input that I need to regulate my body. So instead of shaming myself for it, I found a way to do it that's acceptable, which means I'm not hitting other people anymore. And so often I say to parents, like, what do you want to do? What is your instinct when you get upset? That thing, that is the sensory input your nervous system requires to regulate. You need more of that. If you need to scream, soundproof a room, go get a nice, really thick pillow, walk your butt out into the back 40, whatever it is you need to do to feel comfortable letting that out, go scream for 10 minutes. Just don't do it at your kid.
Right. And that's the whole point. We're trying to not weaponize our words or whatever. Exactly. We're trying to come at this with a kind, aware sense of what we need to say and do. So with that, I want to get onto, because I still want to talk about your parentability, but you have 3 top tips for eliminating defiance, stalling, and ignoring.
Yeah. So the first is reduce the demands. Right? So oftentimes when we're asking our child to do something, we're asking them to use a lot of those executive functioning skills that are really just developing. And so, the usual culprits are working memory, planning and prioritizing, organization, self-monitoring, flexible thinking, task initiation, all of those ones that deal with doing things. And if any one of those is weak and our child doesn't have the energy to do it, then the whole chain breaks down. So reduce the demands for those as much as possible using visuals, right? Like as adults, we don't remember everything off the top of our heads. We have our phones, we have our planners, we have lists that we write down. You can give that to little kids. You just have to use pictures because they can't read.
This is brilliant.
Right? So using social
because it's kind of like our vision of a sticky note.
Yeah, exactly. I have
like
them
for
all
us
over my house. And the funny thing is people will walk into my home and be like, which one of your kids is autistic? I'm like, none of them.
So explain what that looks like. Like,
So I can show you. I have one right here that I'm working on for my kids. Oh, yeah, can you see it? Yes.
oh yeah.
So this will be their getting ready for school. We had to redo it because the old one was getting kind of ratty, and there needs to be Velcro dots put on this still. I haven't quite gotten to it, but this is how my
Oh,
kids remember what to do to get ready for school. I say get ready for school, and I point at it, and they go, okay, what's the first thing? Go to the bathroom. Take their butt to the bathroom. They come back. They close it. What's next? Eat your breakfast. They go. They eat their breakfast. They come back. They close it. What's next? Get dressed. They go do it. They come back. Right? It's a checklist.
yeah.
It's a checklist. And the great thing about this is like my 5-year-old will do this step by step. My 8-year-old will do the first 3 things, come back and go, yep, did that. What's next? Oh, right, got to put my lunch in my backpack, go do it, go to the bathroom again because double elimination. We've learned the hard way. And then, okay, now I can go and put my stuff on to get outside. And so as they get older, they're going to rely on this less and less, but they still need it. It's still there to make sure that they didn't miss anything. Another option for visuals is social stories. So using like a literal, I have one here too. So this one's about getting consent, and this one's printed off all fancy, but these are just stories. They're literal manuals about like, hey, this is how we ask people if they want to play rough and tumble with us. These are the expectations. And the great thing about this is that our brains really like narrative. They really like that beginning, middle, and end. And in fact, our hippocampus, if it has a beginning, middle, and end, it can take that information right away and file it away for later use. Whereas when we give verbal directions, our children have to process the information before the hippocampus can organize it. So it makes, by putting our instructions in a story and putting pictures to it, it makes that information much more available to their brain. Using things like backwards chaining, where you're going to do everything but the last step of something for a child. So, you know, they're having difficulty getting their clothes on to go to school. So you're going to help them with everything but putting their pants on. That's the last step, so that when they do it, you go, woohoo, awesome, you did it. And they feel successful. You're not standing around being like, okay, now put on your t-shirt. Okay, now put on your socks, right? You're helping them with everything until they're completely competent to that last step. And then you back off and you're like, okay, I'm going to help you with your undies. I'm going to help you with your socks. Here's your t-shirt. Yay, you put your t-shirt on. Here's your pants. And which is something they're already successful at. We want to reduce those demands for using their executive functioning skills as much as possible. The next is to create predictability and consistency, because it takes an astronomical amount of energy to think ahead and pivot when things don't go according to plan. The more consistent and predictable we can make our children's lives, the safer they're going to feel, the more energy they're going to have available to meet those demands. So again, anything new or unexpected is mortal danger to a 4-year-old. And it starts to feel that way when they're 3. So the more you can make things expected and consistent, the better behavior you're going to see. And then, as I said, build in those regulation breaks for your child. They don't have to look zen. They don't have to be socially acceptable to literally anyone but you. They just have to make sure that you're not hurting people or property. And building those in throughout the day is going to reduce so many behaviors.
Yeah. What I love about the visual aids or visual boards is that, especially for little children who are just learning how to, you know, they don't know the words.
Yeah.
They don't have to think about what's the word say. They just have to look at the picture. And I mean,
exactly.
It's you know, so it takes half the stress of, you know, like I could write a bunch of sticky notes, or
they have like, there's a picture and there's a word under it or a small sentence, go to the bathroom. So they're building literacy. Like my 5-year-old cannot read. He can't, you put a book in front of him, he can't read. He knows what these things say. He can pick out the word breakfast by sight. So it's, yeah. And as they transition, right, people are like, oh, well, they're going to get reliant on them. Well, no, they're going to start writing lists. They're going to start using our adult visuals.
They're going to be sticky note people. Like,
yeah. I have sticky notes all over my house. It's actually kind of scary.
So, this is great. And what I love about what you do and what you're teaching parents is that there's, you know, like you said, you can read all the books, and there's so many books, but taking that or videos or whatever, until you can take it and put it into some sort of a system that actually works for you,
Yeah.
you're just gonna, it's just more knowledge. Like I think I'm the perfect example of that. When my kids were little and I was going through some crisis, like I was some challenge, I would go and I would take out a book from the library and I would read it until they were on the other side of that challenge. And it was like how I just got through it, sort of. But I mean, we would work together, but it was just, you have so many great ideas. And because it doesn't have to be, I mean, parenting is, it's dedication, it's commitment, it's a job for life. But I think we overcomplicate it a lot just because, like you said, our expectations aren't in line with what your child is actually able to do.
Yeah.
And that's why, like I said, knowing all those sciences early on when they're infants is really just gonna, I think, make a huge difference for parents.
And all of this science that we're talking about, it's so new. Like all of these old idea of parenting, the timeouts, the spanking, the yelling, all of that stuff, that's old Victorian era telos. That's not present science. That's old 200-year-old science. And it takes so long for science, or it did take so long for science to trickle down and actually be something that we do. And so a lot of parents feel very, very self-conscious or guilty for not knowing these things. Most of the science was like at most recent done in the 90s. Yep. So it's new information.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm such a huge proponent of attachment science too, is understanding, what that means for your child, and understanding what your attachment is, because that really does kind of impact, influence the kind of parent you are because of your own personal insecurities. Like in the work that we do at JAI, it's a lot about self-limiting beliefs around parenting, and bringing those beliefs into whether we're permissive or authoritative or authoritarian, that we don't even realize. Just don't even realize these beliefs that we're bringing into our parenting, that, like we said, we either want to be different or we want to do something to change it up. Okay, we've got 3 minutes till the end of the hour, and I want you to tell me about parentability.
Parentability, yeah. So Parentability is my membership program, which is not the format that most parenting education usually comes in, but it's the format that we found works really well, because you do need that ongoing support. You need to have that safe space to go and debrief and be like, hey, this just went off the rails, and this is what happened, and how can I do it differently next time? Yeah. And so in Parentability, we walk you through that framework that I teach in the free class about setting up your child's regulation cycle, really making sure that they're regulated, and then starting to teach them their executive functioning skills and building up those tools. We have an analogy that we use frequently about our executive functioning skills are like the tools in a toolbox. And if I give you a dull saw and tell you to go cut down a tree, you can want to do it, you can know how to do it, you can be willing and able to do it. You're not going to be able to do it because your tool is weak. Your saw is dull. Whereas if I teach you to sharpen that saw, you're going to be able to fell that tree and another one and still have energy left over to go and have a party. So we want to build up those skills so that we're not having to remediate them once they get older. And then we talk about critical thinking and how to teach them in the moment to make good decisions. And so all of that information is in there. It's all very general information, the course information, but then you have access to me and my co-coach, Josh Johnson, who work with you to tweak and troubleshoot and apply it to your child and your family in real time, so that it's not just theory that's floating around there in the ether. You actually have some guidance on how, okay, so your child's doing this, this is how we're going to apply it. Try it, come back, tell us what worked, what didn't, and we're going to tweak. Because I've found, especially when I was in early intervention and as a parent coach, the biggest changes come from the tiniest tweaks. And it's always, you make these big changes and you're like, this is going to be the key. And then you like loosen a screw on one little area of your parenting strategy and everything falls into place. So we're there to guide you through that. And since it's a group program, what I really love about that is, as you said, parents always feel really isolated. I'm like, my kid is the only kid that does this. My kid I am the only one who has ever struggled with my child's self-regulation. you're in a group of parents who are all working on the same thing, all using the same resources that you are. And a lot of times parents have difficulty articulating what's happening with their child, but when you read someone else struggling with a similar thing, you're like, that is what's happening with my kid. And I just couldn't put it into words. So often we have these beautiful group discussions around something that is happening for multiple members. So it's a really great community structure as well as a learning program.
We are at the end of our time. We could keep talking and talking. You're wonderful. Everybody go check out AllanaRobinson.com. You can also go to uncommonsenseparenting.com and definitely take advantage of that free course. I mean, it sounds like it's so much information packed in a nutshell. So thank you so much for coming. This has been wonderful. I appreciate you being here.
Having me.
There's no such thing as a perfect parent. We all agree on that, but hopefully, in my opinion, perhaps conscious parenting is about allowing your child to be your awakening. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for being a part of the Awakened Parent Project. My goal with this show is to help us all become more compassionate and engaged parents by diving into the many techniques and ideologies of the conscious parenting community. This is a safe space to embark on a practical and spiritual journey of self-exploration and expand our ideas about conscious parenting. Got thoughts, questions, ideas? I want to hear from you. Reach out to me if there's a topic you'd like to hear covered on the show, or to share your conscious parenting story by visiting susandolci.com.